What faith are we renewing anyway? What does renewing faith mean in a Unitarian Universalist context? Our prelude, the song Dry Bones that was performed by folk singer Willie Watson, quoted passages from famous stories in Hebrew scripture. Some of them were the Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden story, Moses, Enoch living 365 years. He sang about dry bones, which is actually the title of the song, which was Ezekiel's vision, one of the prophets. And then there were even a few references to healing miracles attributed to Jesus of Nazareth. So those are all very specific faith traditions. And then our guest speakers for this whole month gave us another 3 different examples. Ty Alford started the month. Ty is a Buddhist monk who provided us encouragement to not give up on our spiritual practices, particularly mindfulness and meditation. And then the next week, Professor Ben Cruz Uribe from the UW Green Bay system reminded us to renew our faith in early Christianity by lifting up the importance of women, particularly Mary Magdalene, which of course was then later suppressed by the patriarchy of the Catholic Church. And then last week, Reverend Karen Sandberg asked us to renew our faith in the inherent worth and dignity of everyone, even if we do want to punch them in the face sometimes. A clever sermon title, if there ever was one. Well, these are all rather specific references to specific faith traditions. But we are called to something more fundamental this month with our theme, Renewing Faith. What is the Unitarian Universalist faith we're called to renew? In other words, what, in my opinion, is our general theology? Okay, big disclaimer here. I want to remind everyone we do not have a doctrine or specific theological belief test that we must pass to be a Unitarian Universalist. But as your minister, the person technically in charge of spiritual leadership and spiritual care for our 3 fellowships, I'd like to offer my thoughts on the big question, what faith are we renewing? Well, then there's another disclaimer, because I'm not a big fan of labels, because definitions can be vague, and when religious terms are used, they often can evoke or trigger very strong feelings and reactions. So I'm on thin ice here, I will admit it, but I need to answer this big question, what faith are renewing? And my short answer is religious humanism, the term religious humanism. In spite of my dislike of labels, religious humanism fits for me. I've used this term over the years in sermons before, and it's still the best one for me, so perhaps if I unpack it a little differently today, I hope you'll find new insight, even if it sounds a little repetitive. So I'll start with the second term first, humanism. Humanism is a broad term that probably came to prominence during the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason, which was an intellectual and philosophical movement that dominated Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries. Indeed, it came to the U.S., and we're very familiar with it, in the form of the U.S. Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, where the phrase is, all men are created equal and we all have inalienable rights. Those are humanist concepts. Humanism in this country kind of came to a crescendo with the Humanist Manifesto, a document that laid out all the tenets of humanism and signed in 1933 by a bunch of intellectuals. Well, why do I believe that humanism is the best term available? Frankly, because of agency, human agency. We don't need to rely on supernatural intervention or just mere chance for things to change. And humans have the intelligence and ability to learn to make a difference. The poem I read earlier is one of our readings by Gregory Orr, titled, "This is What Was Bequeathed to Us," says it well. He writes, "This earth the beloved left, and leaving, left to us no other world but this one. Willows in the river, and the factory with its black smokestacks, no other shore, only this bank on which the living gather. No meaning but what we find here, no purpose but what we make." It's a poem that basically is agnosticism, that some divine being, the beloved, created this world and then left it to us to find meaning in it and make it into what we will. We believe that it's up to us to make something of this world. All these images of heaven, nirvana, enlightenment, utopia, they are all up to us if we want to obtain them. The humanists of the early 20th century, when the Humanist Manifesto was signed, tended to believe that if humans just put their scientific minds to something, then progress would be up and onward forever. Unfortunately, it turns out that was a little bit too simplistic of a view. Humanism was primarily a philosophy conceived by and promoted by highly educated, white, privileged men. They lacked a point of view that included all of the diversity of humanity. They undervalued the negative sides of progress, environmental degradation, the breakdown of community, and sometimes they might even dismiss simple natural beauty with a bias towards man-made influences. Additionally, the loudest voices in humanism often were those criticizing anything that was non-scientific or even spiritual. Now, fortunately, society, as well as Unitarian Universalism, has evolved to a more spirit-filled version of humanism. So that's the humanism side of my term. Let me jump to the first term, religious. What do I mean by religious? Well, two things. First of all, it's a communal practice. The famous social researcher Brene Brown has said it over and over again that humans are hardwired for relationship. We are hardwired for connection. And so we find meaning in just being together. In many cases, in religious contexts, people come together to worship. To worship. Well, in our case, I'm using a definition of worship that means to honor or to lift up. And what do we lift up? I would argue we lift up human potential. The other part of religious is we are also spiritual creatures. We have this left brain that's very analytical and logical, and we have the right brain that's very creative, which I've argued before is where the center of our spirituality, our transcendence comes from. So human beings are, by definition, both part of rationalism and mysticism. There's a phrase I use somewhat often that I think is important here, and it is this. It's more important to pay attention to what is relevant than what is right when it comes to religion. I'll say it again. When it comes to religious matters or spirituality, it's more important to pay attention to what is relevant than what is right. So in this case, I'm using the term right to mean truth with a capital T. Wars were fought over things like this. Our theological evolution over time became more universal. We now accept that established religious concepts and metaphors from all world religions are helpful to find meaning and an orientation in our universe. It's not at all important if they are factually true in a scientific sense. So let me give you some examples. I kind of joke sometimes that we are the people of the hyphen. If you've ever been to General Assembly, which is the summer gathering for a whole week of thousands of Unitarian Universalists across North America, it's where we do our legislative stuff. It's where we greet our friends. It's where we hear very inspirational speakers and preachers. But it's also where we have sort of this trade show where you can buy the latest chalice art, or ministers can buy new stoles, or you can find tons and tons of books. And you can find a booth for about every subset of Unitarian Universalism there is. That's where I get with the people of the hyphen. Let me give you examples. I divide these into 4 different categories. I'll start with where I've been talking so far, the non-theists, the people who don't believe usually in any kind of God. They're UU humanists, UU agnostics, UU atheists, UU naturalists. And the naturalist term means all religious truth is derived from a study of natural processes and not from revelation. So it's basically humanism, which doesn't believe in supernatural, doesn't believe in supernatural intervention in the course of history. All of those have booze there, the non-theists. The next are the meditative. I just call it that because I can't think of a better term. You have the UU Buddhists, which are the most obvious, but they're basically generally people who are focused on mindfulness practice and being mindful of what's going on at that moment, being in the moment, the meditative. Then you have the earth-based folks, pagans, Wiccans, Druids, pantheists, Gaianists, transcendentalists. All these have one thing in common, that they find their spiritual grounding and meaning in something that's earth-based. And then finally, the more traditional theists that we're very familiar with in our culture, Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus. All of these have some sort of deity at the center of their faith. All of these are Unitarian Universalists. So that's why I say people of the hyphen. I'm a UU Christian or a UU Jew or UU atheist. But typically, none of us are one of these examples, but rather a blend of things. It's sort of like getting your DNA done, and you find out you're not just German, you're German and English and Swedish and Jewish and French and all kinds of things all wrapped up because your ancestry goes back for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Frankly, it boils down to this. We are all searching for what is meaningful and relevant, not what is right, per se. Ultimately, I believe we are religious humanists, or someone said she calls it spiritual humanists. I like that. It's a theology that places the potential of humanity and the environment that supports humanity above all else. I'd like you to consider our 7 principles. And in my opinion, the first and the 7th are the only 2 that are really principles in the truest sense of the word, and the others are all logistics of how do you get the first 2 done. So I'm just going to focus on the first and the 7th. The first one is the inherent worth and dignity of everyone, clearly a humanist principle. And the 7th is we lift up the interdependent web of all existence. Essentially, it's saying we lift up the interdependent web that supports life as we know it. It supports human potential, and human potential can only exist if life as we know it, with all the interdependencies, exists. Now, we also have a theology that has unlimited resources supporting the individual journey for truth and meaning. We're not a religion that says, these are our sacred documents and it forever shall be only these. We are always open to what we might discover out there. That's why we're a people of the hyphen, right? And officially, if you look on our website, the UUA website, right under the 7 principles, they list the 6 official sources. And it's funny because they're really categories of sources. So it's almost anything you could think of. It's all the world religious traditions, science, simply transcendent wonder, and then the righteous people who made a difference in this planet, like Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Abraham Lincoln, their readings, their thoughts are put down, and we use them as sources as well. Frankly, it boils down to we believe in a theology that believes in the common good. So that is a long explanation of the faith I believe we're being called to renew this month. So why are we called to renew it? Why should I care about renewal? Well, again, I refer back to the poem by Gregory Orr to remind us that it is up to us. Again, this is what was bequeathed us, the earth the beloved left, and leaving left to us nothing, no meaning but what we find here, no purpose but what we make here. And so therefore, what meaning do we find here? This is when I will refer you to the amazing video by Taylor Jalen Fagans called We Need More that I played before this sermon. Again, it's called We Need More by Taylor Jalen Fagans. It's beautiful. I cried the first time I heard it. His sad and tragic description of what our society has become for so many of our children grips my heart and makes us want to cry. Fagin sings about the experiences of boys like Ahmaud Arbery and says this: little black boys don't run outside or play with water guns at night. They run away from red and white blue light. Little black boys don't go to stores or use their pockets anymore. Similarly, Fagans refers to Breonna Taylor's experience and other little black girls with these words: little black girls don't close their eyes or walk the streets alone at night. They turn their cameras on when they see white. They don't open doors or stand near windows anymore. And then Fagans goes on emphatically to ask us, can someone tell me what they're living for? They want more. We need more. We need more. And he ends with, we will try. The world is calling us to live up to our human potential. The world is calling for more. We need more, and we can be so much more. Again, the words of Gregory Orr, the world is calling for us to sing it awake, to turn the beloved into song. How poetic. And it begins, in my opinion, by renewing our faith in Unitarian Universalism and its principles that seek the full potential of all humanity. Beloveds, I implore us to sing with full voice. Sing about this renewed faith we hold dear and give the world more. Amen.